Hi, this is Meg Riley here in Minneapolis, Minnesota, and you've joined us for another episode of The VUU. Today we'll be talking about spiritual direction, and we'll introduce our special guest in just a moment. But meanwhile, why don't the regulars just say hey?
Hi, this is Daisha Hauser, and I'm in overcast Seattle, Washington.
Hi, everybody. This is Reverend Patrice Curtis. I am here in Washington, D.C., and it is gloriously sunny.
I'm here I'm Tom Schade, and I'm here in Ann Arbor, Michigan, where it's sunny, cold, and snowy. I mean, there's a lot of snow on the ground, so it's quite bright.
Hi, I'm Joanna Crawford. I am in Austin, Texas, where it is just rain and rain and rain, and I searched for my kitchen, but I had no bread bags. So my feet, unlike those good Iowa people, my feet are very wet.
Oh, you can tell a story about how you didn't have any bread bags.
Yes, I was so poor or trying to avoid carbs that I had no bread bags. And I am pleased to introduce our guest today, my friend and colleague, the Reverend Tony Lorenzen. He is consulting minister at the Unitarian Fellowship of Houston and at Thoreau Woods UU Church in Huntsville, Texas. He is a co-founder of the Red Pill Brethren, and from that, a organizer of Life on Fire. He's also a spiritual director who has created a new program that I am very interested in called Firewalking. So really glad that Tony could be with us today.
Thank you. It's wonderful to be on The VUU.
Great to have you here.
I'm glad some people have sun because it is very rainy and dreary here in Huntsville today, except for everybody who's on The VUU.
I got nothing. You don't hear me complaining. We are having the mildest winter here in Minnesota. After last year, I mean, I wore a trench coat. This means nothing to people in warm climates, but here usually I'm in my 40 below parka. I don't take it off for 2 months. I wore a trench coat the other night. I don't even know where my hat and mittens are. I love it. I got no complaints.
Well, I'm no scientist, but it seems like that means something, doesn't it? Better weather is the word. Not that I'm a scientist.
I'm not a scientist either. Last year it was really, really cold. This year it's warm. I think it's inconclusive. We just don't know if there's anything going on that's unusual. So,
wow.
So, yes, we're referring to several things about the State of the Union address and responses, which I assume others also enjoyed in different ways. And of course we had Martin Luther King Day this past week, and I know especially with Black Lives Matter in so many cities so well organized that there were just many events that went along with that. I'd love to hear from people about what it was like where you were. Next week, by the way, we'll be having two folks from Black Lives Matter UUs on the show, but I'd love to hear about MLK Day where you were.
In Seattle, we had the estimate we saw in the paper was about 1,000 people. We had a lot of Puget Sound. The ministers organized the congregation, so we had a whole standing on the side of love, bright yellow shirts, and it was really a great march. There was bands, there were union people out, there were a lot of signs, definitely a lot of chanting, hands up, don't shoot. And what was really disappointing is the next day, what most of the news carried is apparently later in the day, I think long after the march was over, there were a few people that someone assaulted a police officer, and that's what got covered, not that over 1,000+ people that marched, really peacefully, and so that was a little bit disappointing, but it was otherwise really good.
Hey, Aisha, let's just pause with you for a minute. Congrats on your world story about the movie Selma. That was really well done.
Thank you. Yeah, it was interesting, and it was genuine. I actually talked through, my experience with Chris, and it was interesting that when I went and the audience, my reaction was genuine. What I wrote, that many in the audience were part of the Seattle Association of Black Journalists because I saw it in Seattle, and I so wanted to desperately crash their discussion afterwards, but then I realized that would just be incredibly insensitive. So, I wrote about that. It was fun. It was great to be in UU World. It was really neat. So, very honored.
Very cool. If you haven't seen it, you can look that up in the UU World Online, and it's going to be in the next print edition, right? So
Yes.
Very cool.
Thank you.
Very cool. Tom, what about Ann Arbor? Anything go on?
Well, University of Michigan does a big week-long thing for Martin Luther King holiday. So there lots of and a big, huge lecture on Monday, and the president of the university spoke and managed to be. I was incredibly disappointed in him because it was all like healing and reconciliation and getting along, and I mean, it was like there was no sense of justice. I don't think justice was even mentioned by him. It was kind of like, well, there's been some unpleasantness about race, and hopefully we'll all be better. But on last night, there was a lecture by Ta-Nehisi Coates, which was very, very interesting and very good.
That's real. Boy, that article on reparations that he wrote.
He went through a bunch of that, and he went through. I mean, he's a very modest fellow for as boldly as he writes. But people kept asking him questions about, what do you think about this? What do you think about that? He would go, well, actually, I've never really studied that, so I don't know. Which is like,
he's a writer. Yeah.
Well, I don't know is like the three most awful words on the University of Michigan campus, right? No one will ever admit that they don't know something because they're so elitist and arrogant over there. So.
Oh yeah. How about Joanna? Where you were? What happened?
Yeah, there were different things going on both in Austin and then in the kind of suburbs surrounding towns, Round Rock out where I'm at, and I'm curious if any of you have heard about this. This was very interesting to me. On Sunday we had an MLK service, of course, and we sang "Lift Every Voice and Sing," and I had a man in the congregation, Michael Van Slyke, join me because he and I both had a story about our first exposure to the song. Mine was, I was in college, and a friend of mine was in the Miss Black UT pageant, and they said, would you please stand for the Negro National Anthem? And just generations of people stood up, and everyone from the children to the grandparents were all singing this song. And I think that was my first real exposure to, oh, there really are there's different countries within my country. He is African American, so he was talking about what it was like as a little boy when his, father was saying, you need to learn this song, and this is the significance. But here is the story I had never heard before, that not only is there I believe, usually now it's referred to as either the Black National Anthem or African American National Anthem, but there is also a flag. And Martin Luther King, before he died, was planning on going to the UN to talk about African Americans being granted a status as a nationality within our country, kind of like the Kurds, in their own country, or the Romanis. Had y'all ever heard? This was just fascinating to me. Had y'all ever heard this story?
No, I've heard about Native people talking to the UN in a lot of different ways about that, but I've never heard about African Americans.
Yes.
I have not heard.
Another, I don't know.
I have not heard about that with Martin Luther King, but along the left, all through from the 30s on, there was a theory that there existed a black belt nation in the South that was a separate nationality within the United States. Similar to oppressed nations in Europe,
right.
But I had not heard that Martin Luther King
within the U.S. I mean, all of the oppressed nations within the U.S. There are many Native nations here.
Yes, though we've never, most of the time that's never been discussed in national terms, but in racial minority terms. In this country, our rhetoric about it.
For Native people, they're not part of the U.S. They're their own nation.
Yeah, that's how they conceive of it, and that's the way it is legally.
Right.
But the tendency is to view
Yeah.
these folks as racial minorities, which is puts it in a whole different frame.
Right.
You know.
Well, the tendency is to view Native American people as extinct. I mean, you know, it's what I grew up thinking. I was shocked to learn there were all these vibrant nations around me that I never heard about. Aisha, were you going to say something?
Yeah, one of the things when we did also an MLK service on Sunday, and I was charged with doing the story for all ages, and I was wanting to write about Martin Luther King as a child, and I don't know how many of you know this. His birth name is Michael Luther King,
Yes.
and his father changed. But yeah, most people didn't know that, and I had no idea, and it was an interesting story. And you know, you wonder, obviously he didn't know what his son would grow up to become, but you know, it's just perfect, because I'm like, Michael Luther King, that kind of doesn't quite have the same ring to it as Martin Luther King. So that was an interesting tidbit that I learned this weekend.
Well, Patrice, you've been featured standing on the side of love. Had some photos of you with a lot of other clergy from your area, and it looked like New York and Boston as well. And it was an interfaith gathering. Will you describe what you were up to? Was that yesterday or the day before?
Yeah, so I guess it was sort of time shifted from official MLK Day, but I'd say about 60 clergy and religious folks gathered to do a die-in at the Longworth building on Capitol Hill. This is a Senate cafeteria. We did it at 12:30 at the height of lunch. It was incredibly busy. And we gathered first to sort of have fellowship together. There was a bus that came down from New York City that brought clergy. It was interfaith, all sorts of denominations there, including AME, which I usually don't see in the crowd. So, and you know, we walked to the Longworth building, and 12:30, all you know, had signs, and were able to stay for 3 minutes and 40 seconds. We were shooting for 4.5 minutes, of course, to represent the 4.5 hours of Michael Brown's body laying uncovered in Ferguson. And then finally, as you can imagine, security is pretty intense there. And so it was, when we had decided before we went that this was going to be
just having a regular day. I mean, it's intense there all the time. So, yeah.
Yeah, it was very powerful to be in fellowship with clergy and religious folks beforehand. Just had some, you know, an amazing briefing, and then just an amazing prayer time together. And then we were sort of paired up. We were in groups, and then we were paired up within those groups. So we were walking with someone, and it was just, for me, it was, I actually have always avoided being in situations, being an active person in a situation where you know, arrest was a possibility. I've been support for that, for nonviolent events, but I always had this kind of thing where I didn't necessarily want to be a black person with a record, no matter what that record was for. And so this was really a spiritual process for me to you know, realize that you know, this was something. I don't say this wasn't more important than other things I've done. I think it's just been a process of my, I don't know, maturation or willingness, probably, really to step through my fear, which is something that we always encourage folks to do. And so for me, that's it. I thought I would be a lot more fearful than I was, to be lying there on the floor. I discovered that I am just so, I love this country, and I am just, we can be so much better than we are right now. I mean, that was just what I was lying there thinking. It's like, what has happened? We have such great aspirations for this country, and we are so much better than how we've been, shall we say, in the last several years. So it was very powerful, and I really appreciate those that organized it, and you know, I think that this is what I'm really enjoying across the country, Meg, as you were talking about what you've been involved in, is how clergy are really stepping up to this, and you know, just really taking this on, and I think it's wonderful.
Amen. Thank you. You brought a tear to my eye. That's, you know, I keep thinking about Mark Morrison Reed's research and how what he says is that it's all relational. The people who stepped up, it was because it was relational. And I also, for other reasons, I have done civil disobedience. It's never been something I love, and no one does, I'm sure. But it's relational why I've risked that a few times here, because people that I love have asked me to. And I think if you look at Mark Morrison Reed's book about cellmate, it's all about who asked whom, who talked to whom. And that's what I feel like is going on now. I don't know about the rest of you. I've certainly talked to colleagues who think we're going about this wrong and think we're alienating people, and you know, and so I think there are a lot of conversations. I'm thinking at Asilomar, it'll be a great place to really deepen into some of these conversations, and because the relationships, I don't know about you, but when I'm afraid and I'm with other people I love, it's like, who cares? It doesn't matter if I'm afraid right now. Look who's here. And even having my 18-year-old, you know, now being charged, which is terrifying as a parent. Mm-hmm. When I look at the list of people who are charged, I'm like, there are no better people on the planet to be on the list with.
Mm. There was a young Jewish man who was part of the action yesterday, and he said something that really touched me. He said, you know, I was raised in prophetic Jewish tradition, and he said, we don't have enough prophets. He said, I want more Jewish people to be engaged and to see what they can do and to see what a difference they can make. But really stuck out for me what he said is that, you know, where are the prophets? You know, we harken back to Martin Luther King Jr. and he, you know, he will forever be in history. And I'm ready. I'm ready for a prophet of today.
But, you know, people are saying, and the Black Lives Matter movement is structured not to be centered around one, you know, elevated personality, that it's a much more of a collective. And I think of Thich Nhat Hanh saying, you know, what if the next Buddha isn't a person but a community? And so I really wonder if, I mean, there are many, like I think Van Jones is very prophetic, for instance. There are many prophetic.
And Reverend Barber.
Barber, my gosh. They're amazing leaders, and I really think what Black Lives Matter, at least here, they're really rotating the leadership, so different people are in charge of different events, and there isn't a leader. And I
don't so much mean just Black Lives Matter when I'm speaking of prophets. This is definitely an issue of our time, but we also have other issues of our times. I mean, you mentioned Native Americans. I mean, there are all sorts of issues, and so, and you know, Thich Nhat Hanh would never claim himself as a prophet, but come on. That kind of prophet, you know, not one who's not somebody grandizing and I want everyone to look up to me, but you know.
Good, touche. You got that one. Well, this is a great conversation. We will be, as I said, talking about Black Lives Matter next week. I'm quite excited about that. We have a couple great guests coming in, but we have a great guest here today. So I want to turn to Tony Lorenzen. And Tony, tell us, fire walking, is that what you do with people? You have them walk on fire? Or what? How does that describe spiritual practice?
Yes. It actually does have people walk on fire. I grabbed the name, I kind of borrowed it from a program I did here in Houston called Faith Walking, which is run by a guy named Jim Harrington, who I believe is a Baptist. Joanna? Yeah. And I think Joanna's done the program as well. Is that correct? No, you have not gone on the program.
I've done certain modules in it. I have not done the big weekend-long thing that you did.
Okay. So when I did Faith Walking, I was there with a bunch of people from all different walks of Christianity, figuring out how they could be more missional and pointed in their life. How could they live out their faith in their day-to-day, in their context where they were? And what it was, that struck me as being a spiritual director is what they were getting people to do is what spiritual direction gets people to do is take a really deep inward journey, get really in touch with what motivates you spiritually, what your core values are by which you say you try to live, and get that to surface and bring it out more and more and more. And so I took the name from this program and I'd used the image, I think, of the chalice instead of faith walking to be fire walking, because I want to develop something for our community that can help do the same thing, but isn't going to turn people away by names or words, because part of the journey we want to take a lot of these people on is a deep enough inner journey that the words are not going to bother them anymore when they get to the other side of the coals. So
wait, so deep that words don't bother them? Really? That would be the promised land to me.
well, yeah, and I mean not in a way that we don't want to use words, I guess, prophetically, like we were just speaking about, because words are important and we understand their power. But when the word faith or the word spirit or the word God or whatever word somebody's using in a spiritual context is going to block you from doing your own journey, that's where we still have a lot of work to do. And how can we set up something that intentionally takes our people through a formation process where they get to really internalize what our core values are all about? And one of those is allowing others to have something work for them spiritually that might not work for you, and that's got to be okay. And microcosm, macrocosm, I mean, that's what we're learning all over again with Black Lives Matter, is that your experience is not someone else's experience.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Amen.
So Tony, I know that you have trained, in addition to all of the training and Harvard and all of that you've done for ministry, you also trained as a spiritual director.
Right.
How much did that influence creating the firewalking program?
It influenced it quite a bit, because I think the greatest learning for me, and I think when I did the spiritual direction training, really intense 3-year program, which basically amounted to another graduate degree, but you don't get anything but a certificate when you're done, was the work that it forced everyone in the program to do on listening, both to themselves and to other people. And one of the great benefits it did for me as a minister is it really highlighted for me all the mistakes I made as a minister, not being able to listen to and hear people. I was like, oh, I get it now. So in a sense, it made ministry better in general. But a lot of our folks, especially when they get to a UU church, they need someone to hear their story. They need someone to see them. I think the same way that, you know, somebody who's homeless under the bridge standing in the corner, as much as they need your money or food, they need you to look at them in the eye and say hello. And I wonder sometimes if we miss that, so centered on our own individualism or our own journey or our own opinion, that we're not teaching people how to see each other. So the big lesson I brought from that is how to see each other, and combine that spiritual direction training of listening and in learning how to reflect and ask questions and mirror back, was also taking my congregation at Pathways at the time through Wellspring, which was developed at First UU in Rochester, New York, where they started centering on listening, adopting Parker Palmer's method of just listening, no crosstalk, no talking back, no teaching, no fixing, no saving, no setting each other straight. And trust that in that process that we support each other and we make a safe place. But the equal benefit is that in the silence, when it's our turn to share, we hear, sometimes for the first time or in a long time, our own souls speak. And there we're able to do the work on ourselves. And if we can create that on a regular basis in an intentional way as a journey we take people on, they come as visitors, they start to get ingrained in the community, and then it's like, yeah, now it's time for you to do our formation program.
Let me go backward. Let me go backward a second. For someone who has no idea, what is spiritual direction, and how is it different from, like, you know, a therapist or going and talking to a priest, or, you know, that whole spiritual thing? It sounds a little woo-woo, Tony.
Well, in a sense, it is. because spiritual direction, as any good spiritual director will tell you, is a misnomer. Nobody's really directing anything so much as taking your hand and journeying with you. Again, it involves a lot of listening, a lot of asking questions, and from the outside, it's going to resemble more than anything else going to a therapist. But whereas you might come in and talk about how you got in a fight with your mom and all this stuff with your mom, the relationship with your mom has been bugging you over and over again, it flared up this week, and the things she said really got to you, and you want to yell at her, and you hang up the phone, the therapist will go into something clinical about that in your relationships and family dynamics and family systems, whereas the spiritual director is more likely to say, so how did that affect your heart? Did it stop you from listening to God this week? Did it stop you from being able to love other people? The whole shift is to the heart and to the affectation and to how people experience their own spirit more than it is trying to do the fixing or the setting straight of what might be a clinical issue of mental health or dealing with depression or dealing with anger. It's more about where's your heart, where's your deepest value, where's your God, or what takes the place of that for you come in. Is this anger with your mother stopping you from seeing, hearing, accepting, making use of any divine feminine images? You know, who knows where that conversation goes at that point, but that's the focus other than all the clinical stuff around healing your family issues.
That's really interesting. You know, this week there's a Huffington Post blog or piece going around Facebook about addiction, and that the main, according to this person, which obviously we could argue about this, but that a really key, let's just say a really key piece of healing addiction is connection, and being, as you said, being seen, being known, being heard, being cared about. And that just made me think about how you know, how do we build more of that in our lives? So you see people in formal hour-long sessions, primarily one-to-one. Is that
yes.
primarily the way that it's done?
Yeah, I meet with people either like this on the internet in a video chat, or in person, one-to-one, sitting in a room, office, comfortable place, and invite them into conversation, which usually starts off with something just as simple as, so, how's it going? And then I listen for the heart stuff, and then I listen for the spirit stuff. And when it comes up, I say, you tell me more about this. Stop about that. What do you feel about that? And I keep taking down the road. My job, in a sense, is to say, if somebody's dark, look, the light's coming from over there. Did you miss that?
I have a friend who does this in a battered women's shelter every week. She's a retired minister, and she's a trained spiritual director. And I just think that's so profound, that the battered women's shelter is recognizing that there's a spiritual dimension that needs healing in those families, as well as the other dimensions. Sorry, Joanna.
Some of you are out on the West Coast, yes, if I remembered our introductions correctly. And out in Vancouver and Seattle, I believe, a number of Roman Catholic nuns started a movement where they started opening storefronts to do spiritual direction with people who are homeless or on the street or living lives of near homelessness or extreme, difficult financial situations. So they're on the street in their downtown lot, and they opened just a storefront with comfortable chairs and pillows and cushions and candles. And what they do is they let people come in and they listen.
Yeah, in Seattle there's also a teriyaki place that has it's a teriyaki takeout, and on the side there's chairs and it's a prayer corner. And even on their website, you are invited to get teriyaki takeout, and if you want to pray, the owner of the store will come from behind the counter, sit with you, hold your hand, and so it says water-free, prayer-free, and something else free, and of course you have to buy the food, but it's really quite, I don't know what it is. Maybe it's the lack of sun that brings out the spirituality in people, but it's really quite powerful.
Wow, I'm tearing up over teriyaki and prayer. So Tony, what about atheists? Is there any value for them of going to see a spiritual director?
Oh my particular experience is that when I did the Wellspring program, and now my experience with doing firewalking, is that the people who seem to be most involved, who go the deepest, are the people who start as self-proclaimed atheists or rationalistic humanists. The more on the rational end of the spectrum the folks seem to start on, the deeper they seem to go with the spiritual direction. I know we had folks at Pathways who came into the program as very much on the atheist end of the spectrum, and we're still seeing their spiritual director a couple years later when I ran into them on Facebook or in person. That's amazingly intense for me, is that when people see it as something for their heart, it's not the clinician, it's not the therapist, and because it's spiritual direction does not mean you have to think or believe or have an approach to things in any one certain way. There's nothing that has to change your view of the universe with getting in touch with you, and what's, in a sense, the most humanistic thing we do is get people in touch with their own heart. And if you call it soul or spirit, or if you call it heart, or you don't know what to call it still when you're done, that's all fine. It's the journey that's important more than the label. And that is, after all, what I believe we are supposed to be all about.
When you say they start on the atheist end of the spectrum, I think of many people I know who go, whoa, wait a minute, this is going to change me, you're saying? So can you be more specific when you say that? Like, they start there, and then what happens? When they deepen, what do you see happening? The language becomes less important? They actually change their worldview, all of the above?
Did they become theists?
Well, I guarantee that when anybody who does spiritual direction or a deep spiritual formation program, what they're going to undergo if they dive into it, they're going to undergo transformation. And it's been said that, you know, the joy and the terror, the emotion, the learning that goes along with transformation is not actually what transformation is. Transformation is being different when you end and when you start. So when I say where people start, it's because they're going to start somewhere and they're going to end somewhere else. Things may change. It may not be their ultimate, you know, religious or theological or philosophical outlook, but they will undergo transformation. And part of the work of the spiritual director in any spiritual formation program is to get people into the frame of mind that you cannot figure it all out ahead of time. You know, I think we're missing Eric today, because in his book on Simply Pray, he has this section about just getting wet, that you can't explain what the water is like to anybody until you jump in and get wet. And doing your spiritual work is like that. You cannot explain to someone what transformation is, or getting that deeply in touch with themselves, or that deeply in touch with their own values is going to be like. You can explain it, you can define it, I can give you definitions, I can talk about process, but you cannot explain to someone what transformation is like until they go through a process where they enter into it with the idea that by changing how they behave, regularly showing up for direction or the group or their own spiritual practice over time with a complete dedication, is going to have a profound impact, not only on how they see things. One of my spiritual direction clients put it this way: it's not about seeing something differently, it's about having new eyes. And your eyes will change when you commit to your own spiritual practice and your own engagement with a process that's designed to move you from where you start further on down the road.
Tony, when you ask people, and I imagine you do, when you ask people, well, why did you decide you wanted to get a spiritual director? What do they say?
They say a lot of different things. My experience is that all the answers kind of place them somewhere on what I guess is called the mystic's journey. Somebody who's seeking, then there's an awakening or an enlightenment, and then there's a losing of that awakening or enlightenment, you know, the dark night of the soul type thing. And then there's a recovery of the light, and it may be different or have gone through a transformation than what it was before, and then a settling into peace with the light and the dark and who you are in your life. And the answers seem to all fall in, at least for me, what I experience the answers is one of those stages of the mystic's journey. People say they're coming because they don't know what they believe, and they grew up in this church or with this religion, and they're not there anymore, and they don't know what they are, or they were very spiritually abused, and they don't want to talk about religion. They'll talk to me, but we're not going to talk about religion. Or they'll come in and say they were very religious and spiritual, and now I just don't want anything. People will come in being Christian, or they'll come from a UU church, and they'll come in with, they've lost their faith. They've lost whatever connection they had to whatever was their religious outlook or where they felt placed or at home. Or they'll come out, or they'll come in after they've gone through, say, some depression or some other real trauma, and are trying to piece the light and dark back together. So the answers come from a wide variety of places, but for me, they all seem to fall into that journey somewhere, that they're all on that mystic's journey. They're all on that journey of where's my heart, where's my center, and how do I get back on that journey, or is that journey even there for me? And I'm not sure if that's a specific answer to your question, because the things they say are so varied, but I think they all fall into that kind of approach.
So what I hear you saying is that they all have defined themselves, that they do have a spiritual, mystic, religious, I mean, it's in that sphere of life that they see a need, and they're coming into that. I was just wondering, like, you know, there's a lot of folks, and myself included, who have a lot of problems and don't define very many of them as spiritual problems, right?
Right.
You know, so that whole, you know, coming.
So I'll be clear. That's where I see all the questions coming from. Where they see things coming from is very different. You know, I've had people come to me because all they want to talk about is their partner, or all they want to talk about are their children, or all they want to talk about is how much they hate their job. And sometimes I'll talk to someone for a few months before anything spiritual in any way comes up. Sometimes I'll talk to somebody for months and nothing that I'm grabbing spiritual is resonating for them. And I've had conversations where, you know, in all our conversations so far, you haven't mentioned a therapist or a counselor. You might want to think about that. You know, and then referring off to the clinical side is something a lot of spiritual directors do on a regular basis. Although I think equally, we also find, I know it's my experience, that a lot of people who do spiritual direction are also doing counseling. They're also seeing a therapist. So it's that all this spiritual stuff seems to come up in therapy, so I get people who will come in and say, my therapist said I should get a spiritual director. So all that part of the conversation can really be focused on, because, you know, the clinician doesn't have as much time to deal with that, or maybe take a clinical approach that doesn't want to deal with all of that because it's not a valid thing for them or whatever. So get a lot of that as well.
So I want to get wet. Tony has agreed that we can actually, I guess if Hank were here, he would be all over that comment, and I can see 13-year-old
Hank would be pouring a glass of water over his head. Just to,
So, but I'd like to try it. And Tony, you've agreed to model a little bit of group spiritual direction here. I want to give a nod to one of our viewers from Turkey that's here. I love somebody in Turkey joining us this morning, or evening where you are. So let's go around with another bit of introductions. I'll give a nod to Behind the Chalice. We have Scott Yeomans on tech today, and then I'm Meg Riley in Minneapolis. Let's introduce ourselves again.
I'm Aisha Hauser in Seattle.
Patrice Curtis in Washington, D.C.
Tom Schade, rarely accused of being silent.
Tom Schade in Ann Arbor, Michigan. Off the mute button.
Joanna Crawford in Austin.
That's great. So Tony, if you'd tell us, and viewers also can participate in this, I imagine. So.
Sure. So what we'll do is we'll do something like an excerpt from a firewalking session, or what somebody might have experienced in a wellspring session, where we're going to just take turns sharing, and we'll start with some opening words. we'll do some sharing from what we call, Parker Palmer names, a third thing. So I sent out everyone a quote from Quaker theologian Philip Gulley earlier. And after we do a brief sharing of checking in, which we've all done, I think, at the beginning of the show, but we'll model that. Then we'll do a reflection on the third thing, and then we'll do some closing words. All through that, we will not ask anybody any questions. We will not respond to anyone who shares anything. It'll all just be a listening on our part, and people can take their turn to share when they feel so moved. All right?
All right.
So we come this morning sharing a common Unitarian Universalist heritage, and we bring with us in our heart the flame of the chalice that's the symbol of our faith. And we gather knowing that countless lives, known and unknown, have helped to form us and our faith community and brought us to this present hour. We affirm the strength that is ours to live this day and the potential we possess to create a better tomorrow. We come together in faith that our lives may be enlightened, our love deepened, and our path together illumined by peace, by justice, by love. I invite everybody to check in briefly about what's going on with you, something you may need to put down so that you can be more fully present in this time, something that's heavy on your heart and you need us to hear, you need someone else to hear, something that you just want to share because you want someone to share in your happiness. I came to the VUU a little agitated this morning. It's been a rough day. I could not get anything done yesterday. I kept feeling anxious and on the clock, and like there's not enough time for me to finish all these different tasks I had to do. And then when I was getting dressed to go stand vigil at an execution last night, it occurred to me that I had tomorrow. And people killed by the prisoner had no more tomorrows, and he certainly has no more tomorrow. He is not here today. So it occurred to me that that might have been bothering me all day and never got to the surface.
I can feel my root system is shaky right now because of the charges being leveled against my 18-year-old.
I've been thinking about my soon-to-be 17-year-old leaving home in about a year and a half to go to the East Coast for college, and that's been emotional for me whenever I think about it.
I've been feeling particularly tumbleweedish these days. I have a lot of things to do, and I spend a lot of time talking to people on the computer, and so I feel like I'm moving fast, but not. I think you talked about roots, Meg. I'm not feeling particularly rooted at the minute.
I'll echo that. I have been feeling a little scattered this week. Lots of things going on, a lot of them really good, but yes, I'm not feeling as rooted as I would like.
And we may have some people wanted to let people know if they're with us in the sharing, if they wanted to enter things in chat that they'd like shared and for us to hold in their heart to do so as well.
I too have been feeling scattered. My energy is going in a couple of very strong and seemingly different directions, and I feel more like I'm cycling from one thing to the other rather than finding my usual way of feeling integrated.
Thank you, everyone. Our third thing, or our item for reflection, is a statement from Quaker theologian Philip Gulley. And he's talking about the question of salvation that is so often put to him as a Quaker minister. And one of the things he has said is, "I was not born in sin, needing to be rescued from an angry God, and neither were you. We were born immature and incomplete in an unfinished world. Salvation is growing up, growing wise, and finishing the job. It is becoming whole and healed and realizing our connections. Every now and then we catch a glimpse of it. Someday, I believe, we will live in the fullness of it. And that is my hope, that is my joy, that is my job." I invite you to reflect on that and share whatever comes up for you. Paste it into the chat again. People are with us. Hopefully they can get that back in the chat.
This quote really speaks to me because I often find myself hearkening back to the fact that we are born blessed, and that if we could find a way as a community of humans, as a community as immediate community, as a family community, as church community, as school community, if we could find a way to honor the way in which children come into the world and understand how precious it is to be able to hold on to that during maturation, to hold on to that blessed beauty, that we could transform how we are together, that we really could learn to live day to day with loving compassion for each other, that it is there for us if we could learn to protect it as it is gifted to us by children when they are born. And that is my hope and joy in the world, that it's so close, sometimes I feel I can almost taste it.
I love the progressive vision that quote brings up, because I think for me it's both aspirational and attainable. You know, if today I can just be a little more wise, a little more compassionate, a little more mature than yesterday, you know, that I think I can do that. For tomorrow, I don't know, but for today, I can do that.
I think for me that quote is why I love direct action for justice, because that's when I feel, when I'm with a really diverse crowd where people are standing up for that vision of all being beloved, is when I feel the most whole, because I feel like in the brokenness we live in, there are a whole lot of ways that I'm with the brokenness, but when I'm with people who, even for a moment, are saying what Patrice just said, together, that's when I feel the most whole.
For me, I was thinking about how I was born, what I was born into in the Muslim faith, and my mother's interpretation of it, and it was very much about being born in sin and being right with God. So for me, you know, speaking also to what Patrice said, for my children, it's been my life's mission to make sure they know they're loved, and other children. I'm a religious educator in my life. That's been paramount for me, that all the children I ever come across, my own and others, that they know they're loved and held in love and so deeply wanted.
I don't think I grew up with that angry God needing to be rescued. That was, you know, that was not part of my faith background, but you know, the compulsion comes in. There's still compulsion, right? There's still, you know, growing up, growing wise, and finishing the job. Still can feel, you know, there are days that I glimpse that I don't actually have a job to do. Right? that I'm just a person living, and that sense of duty, and that, you know, duty and destiny and obligation, and you know, I think my parents talked about leaving the world a better place later. You know, you go, well, and you go, well, that's, you know, there's a lot of times I really resonate with that, and there's a lot of times where I go, well, isn't that a pretty huge job, right? You know, so you know, there's that whole, I don't know, they squirm around with this stuff.
Thank you. If you have glimpsed any light while we have spent time together, I invite you to carry that light with you as best you can into your day. Go in peace, Holy Ones, and remember that you are holy ones.
Thank
And
you,
typically the session, we would invite people to leave in silence, to not stop and chat, to not ask follow-up questions, but to keep a spirit of contemplation so they left the room and or left the building, went home. We won't do that on the VUU because we're not quite finished yet, and people would be wondering why we're all sitting here not saying anything for another few minutes. That's part of helping create the space for people to stay with that, and not do what we, I think, so often tend to do, not just as people, but in our Unitarian Universalist circles, as needing to jump up and say something or offer our idea or make sure that our opinion gets in there. Just be there. As maybe Tom shared with us, sometimes we don't have any other job to do but just.
Tony, have you done this in a group? Sorry.
So what do you mean by a group?
In other words, it sounds like it sounds like your experience has been one-on-one individuals, but have you, like, you know, had maybe 4 or 5 people, just like you did with us, engage in this?
Yes, in fact, this is how firewalking works. So I do this on a regular basis. I do individual direction on a regular basis. Maybe half my clients, since I've been doing direction, by the way, have been UU seminarians, and that makes me happy to know it. And I do this a lot with groups, and this is more how the group direction process works, that people, instead of just sharing with me, are sharing with a group, and in order for that not to get bogged down, we don't talk. You know, I think, again, that listening is so important. sometimes even when we respond to people out of our heart and because we care, what we're doing is we're connecting something of ours to theirs, and then it doesn't become their experience anymore. You know, so if I find you crying in grief about something that's happened to you, you know, I'm not going to, you know, what I want to do is say to Meg, yeah, I know what it's like when your child is arrested. But when I do that, it's not about Meg's experience anymore, it's about mine. And I need to have the courage to let Meg have her own experience and trust that I'm there anyway. And I got her back, and I'm there. I mean, even when somebody's crying, we hand them a tissue. Why am I handing you a tissue? Because it's bothering me, you're sad. You may not want a tissue right now, you know? And I think we don't even think through some of this. And part of it's just we're trying to be nice, we're trying to be considerate, and sometimes even our best intentions, we never know when they're going to be taking the focus away from someone experiencing what they need to experience, feeling what they need to feel, owning themselves, how they need to own, you know? And if we practice this, if we have the direction group, if we have spiritual direction, if we have somebody we can do this with, a group we can do this with, then I think what we find is it becomes easier to let the African American woman I'm marching with Black Lives Matter in Houston last month to speak and tell me her story without having to tell her mine. It's maybe my job.
So, Tony, in your opinion, is spiritual direction something that you recommend for religious professionals, or, you know, are we done and we don't need it?
Strangely enough, I think this came up on one of our chat lines the other day. Is like, is this a professional expense? Yes, it's a professional expense. Of course it is. Yes, you know, not only should you be doing it, can you be doing it? If your congregation or your ministry or anything is helping you spend some money to take care of yourself, of course, this is a legitimate thing. Please do it. We are never done. The whole part, I can't be a spiritual director. No spiritual director can tell you they can do their own work if they're not in direction themselves. So yes, it's for everybody. I think anybody can benefit from it at any point in their life, any point in their journey.
You know, what's interesting to me, you know, circling around, because we're coming to the top of the hour, we're just about to finish, so I'll circle back to Martin Luther King. I've heard that what his original desire was to be a pastoral counselor. And as you lift up the links between this deep spirituality and the courage to be out in the world, I think that, you know, they're not separate. So often they're separated, like, here's what prophet means, here's what pastoral means. And as I think we've experienced and touched today, they're so connected. So this is yet another part, I think, of honoring Martin Luther King's legacy, is that depth of commitment to spirit. So thank you so much for joining us, Tony. I will offer up last words for folks who'd like to say anything.
Thank you so much for coming on, Tony. This has been wonderful.
I really enjoyed, and I think it shows the power of how all of us just dropped right into it with you. You know, it was really, really, I think, fairly easy. So thank you.
Yes, thank you.
Thanks, Tony.
Thanks to all of you.
If people want to learn more about firewalking, where should they go?
firewalkinguu.wordpress.com or email me at revtonyuu@gmail.com.
Thanks.
Okay.
And I am looking for ministers, colleagues, spiritual directors, RE folks, anybody who's interested to look through the whole thing, give feedback. It's always a work in progress to make it better for the next people who go through it.
Amen. I just wanted to take our last minute and lift up Marcus Borg, who died this week, who I think for so many of us was such an important teacher, and he was 72. Young. That seems so young now. Used to
Doesn't it?
Seems really too young, just too young. And just to acknowledge the many, many people who are grieving that loss. And if you don't know the work of Marcus Borg, B-O-R-G, I commend it to you. Yeah, I didn't want the hour to go by without acknowledging that. Well, anything else? So otherwise, we'll see you next week. We are having again, I'll say this for the third time, which I usually don't, but I'm really excited about the two leaders that we're bringing in to talk about Black Lives Matter. So that'll be great, and this has been great. And will you do those closing words again, Tony, that you did? If you got any light here, will you say that again?
If you received any light in our time together, may you take it with you into the rest of your day. Go in peace, Holy Ones, remembering always that you are.
Amen.
Amen. Amen.